All right, welcome to part two of chapter four, sound recording in popular music. Hopefully you have already watched the part one video. A lot of it is history. I would strongly encourage you to watch it if you haven't, because there's going to be a lot of stuff that I covered in that part one of chapter four that will wind up either on a quiz, midterm, or final. So we are on to part two, which is I'm very excited about because there's some cool stuff coming up here that I want to talk about. So let's jump back into the PowerPoint here. Okay, so we obviously last time left off with all of the different genres and formats of music that have been popular, particularly since the 1950s to modern day. Now let's talk about what I call the technology timeline. All right. Now, what's interesting is, for me, it kind of begins in the early 1980s. Back when I was a teenager. You guys probably, a lot of you probably haven't even heard of this outfit, but MTV. Now, so prior to MTV coming on the air in August of 1981, we will be talking a lot more about the top 40 when we get to radio in chapter 5. But top 40 was something that was a very popular format that radio turned to from the 1950s on. And so if you turned on any kind of radio station, particularly any kind of music station, of course, you would hear, in many ways, you'd hear the top 40, right? So somebody eventually came up with the idea to take that and translate that to video, because now television is around. Now we also see in the late 70s and early 80s, when we get to television, we'll talk about cable television. Cable television obviously was something that was now bubbling to the surface. And the idea of cable television was that you had a lot more channels and a lot more different ideas for, kind of television networks that had to be sort of dreamt up, right? So one of them said, why don't we dedicate an entire television channel to music? And so the idea of merging top 40 from the music side to the idea of trying to find content on television, cable television in particular, sort of created this perfect storm where the idea of MTV was born. And on August 1st, 1981, thus the legend of MTV was born. Now today, of course, and of course that was all music videos, right? And what's kind of fun about this is that this really this gave birth to the idea of the music video, and it became a very popular thing for a while. And of course now, MTV doesn't play music videos anymore, and it's something that's kind of come and gone, but you still see music videos that were released on YouTube and all over the web by performers, and that's because they have their roots in MTV when it was introduced back in 1981. So the disc jockey became the video jockey, or VJ, right? It was a dedicated outlet for music on cable. It was modeled after the top 40, and I'm not going to play it for you because if I play this on YouTube, they'll probably take it down. But you can certainly find it. Just look up the Buggles. That's Buggles, the Buggles, and the name of the song that was the first song ever played, appropriately named, was "Video Killed the Radio Star." That was what the first video ever played on MTV is. Nice little trivia answer there, trivia question. Now, so it's "Video Killed the Radio Star." Now, what's interesting is, one other thing I want to mention about music videos is that they have, it was really kind of a cultural, MTV was really a cultural thing. It was really, it was embraced by the American public, particularly by teenagers and folks in the younger demographic. You could say that a television show like Miami Vice, which was 1985, with the main characters wearing topsider shoes and members only jackets, was inspired by MTV. And MTV also I think spawned a tremendous amount of creativity, particularly from the directing side. So for any of my filmmakers out there, there's some pretty big famous directors that have gotten their starts with music videos. In fact, just to name a few, let's see, we got Frances Lawrence. You don't know who Frances Lawrence is? She is the mastermind behind the second, third, and fourth movies in the Hunger Games. She also did I Am Legend. Anyway, she directed over 60 music videos. I should say not. I'm sorry. Francis is a he, not a she. Sorry. Anyway, directed over 60 music videos throughout his career for artists such as Beyonce, Jennifer Lopez, Britney Spears. Spike Jonze was also got his start in directing music videos. David Fincher, very famous director, of course, directed one of my favorite movies of all time, Fight Club in 1999. Gone Girl was another good one. Anyway, Fincher was also there. Michael Bay of Transformers fame and other things, right? Pearl Harbor was also started out. Tarsem Singh. We also have Antoine Fuqua, I think that's how he says his name. Best known for movies such as Southpaw, Olympus Has Fallen, Training Day, got his start, and Gus Van Sant, one of the most innovative filmmakers of all time. Gus Van Sant's impressive repertoire includes Psycho, Good Will Hunting, Milk, and he obviously was during his time in the music industry, Van Sant worked with stars such as Elton John, David Bowie, Red Hot Chili Peppers, and it just goes on from there. So needless to say, MTV was a incredibly culturally important part of music history. But as we move on, want to talk about the CD, right? Something that you know has kind of come and gone. And I still remember walking into you know, a stereo store in Boulder when I was in college and hearing a CD for the first time and just being absolutely you know, blown away by the quality, the fidelity of the crispness, the clearness of the CD as it compared to like a vinyl on a record player, right? So this was really the first significant piece of technology that really kind of bumped vinyl records kind of to the, you know, basically made them obsolete for the most part, although there's still some out there, but you know, it's more of a, you know, it's more of a collection thing than it is an actual, like, I would say, you know, momentum thing, right? But anyway, first CD was released by Billy Joel, 52nd Street by 1985. The CD sales take 25% of the market away from LPs, and then by 1988 overtake the market. They were eventually integrated into personal computers. Of course, this is the idea of putting data on a you know, computer disk, right? So that was that's the CD. Hold on, my mouse is doing weird things here right now. Let me get this popped up. All right, so hey, I'll get with you in about 25 minutes. Anyway, so yeah, so the CDs were eventually integrated into personal computers. All right, MP3, which was obviously a file format, was developed in 1992. It enabled digital recordings to be compressed into smaller, more manageable files. And with the increasing popularity of the internet, of course, that we talked about in chapter 2, and in the mid-1990s, computer users began swapping MP3 music files online because they could be uploaded or downloaded in a fraction of the time it took to exchange non-compressed music files. And of course, what it did was it eventually led to Napster's infamous free file sharing service, which of course, illegal file swapping, all this stuff that came along, right? And it really, you know, changed the industry in terms of the fact that you had all these performers that were seeing all this music that people have been paying for, suddenly not paying for it because they could so easily swap it through the internet. And I'm sure that, you know, some of you still do that. I would say I'm not a saint when it comes to you know, illegal file sharing back in the day, and I wasn't just doing it with music, I was doing it with film as well. So in any event, the internet swapping site Napster, it alarmed the recording industry. It really made in-store music sales suffer. The industry blamed online swapping, of course, and eventually Napster, the federal government went after Napster in 2001. But others, of course, you know, or others, I should say, emerged in its wake, right? Anyway, the recording industry fought back with thousands of lawsuits, many of them successful. By 2010, Grokster, eDonkey, Morpheus, and LimeWire have been shut down. Kazaa settled a lawsuit with the music industry, became a legal service. And by 2011, several major internet service providers, including AT&T, Cablevision, Comcast, Time Warner Cable, and Verizon, had agreed to help the music industry identify customers who may have been illegally downloading music and try to prevent them from, by doing so, sending them copyright alerts, warning letters, redirecting them to web pages about digital piracy. You can read more about it obviously in chapter 4. So as it cracked down on digital theft, the music industry, realizing it would have to somehow adapt to its business into a digital format, turned to something called iTunes, which was what Apple obviously came up with. As it introduced the iPod in 2001, it was a portable music player for playing MP3 files. And of course, Apple realized record profits as a result. So Apple's idea essentially was, we go to the music industry, we go to the performers, we go to the record labels, and listen, we will sell your music for 99 cents a pop. We'll basically come up with a percentage of how much you want to keep versus how much we keep, and everyone makes money. And that 99-cent kind of price point made it possible so that people who may have thought about illegally downloading songs and having to deal with all of the possibility of getting, a nasty letter or some kind of fine, found this to be much more digestible, right? And so by 2014, Apple reported 390 million sold, and that was kind of their high water point. And of course, once the iPhone sort of came to be, and then of course now we have streaming media, the idea of the iPod, quite honestly, and originally the idea of iTunes is sort of has kind of waned, if you will. But it was interesting, right? 99 cents per song. And a lot of people thought originally that it wouldn't outdo legal file sharing. It wound up actually becoming very popular. And probably the most songs downloaded would be 25 billion songs downloaded as of 2013. And of course, as I said, phased out in favor of Apple Music or some other similar service. Speaking of which, and then I want to get into this video that I think you'll find very interesting. So these companies have come along in more modern times. And I know that you've heard, of all 5, right? Which is basically Pandora, right? Which is the idea that it's kind of like an online radio, almost like an online radio station, if you will. Spotify, where you have your playlist, and if you depending on how much money you spend, you can actually pay for a premium service where you don't have to have advertisements, where if you just get the free app that you download on your phone, you have to deal with a lot of advertising. iHeartRadio, which we'll get into in the next chapter in more specifics, but the fact is now that we have radio stations that, obviously not just broadcast their stuff over radio, but also broadcast over the internet. And you can do so on apps on phones. And Clear Channel, by the way, is now what's called iHeartRadio. And then, of course, Apple Music. So I don't know what format you use, but I do want to share this with you. So this gentleman that we're about to hear from, his name is Alan Cross. He's a Canadian journalist, music journalist, and about 3 months shy of when the pandemic hit, he was doing a TED Talk up in Canada, and his thing here was called "Streaming is Streaming Killing Music." And I listened to this. It's about a 15-minute listen, 20-minute listen. We're not going to do the whole thing, but we're going to do the point that I really think you will enjoy about it. But I'd like to hear this, because not only does he talk about, does he eventually get into what streaming is, but prior to streaming, he uses the term called the container, and he talks about how music from the 19th century to modern times, and he ties it together, which I think is brilliant. So let me stop sharing here, and I'm going to play this for you. And if for some reason YouTube gets mad at me, I will certainly provide this link for you. It's on your PowerPoint, but I'll also try to provide it for you. Oops, sorry guys. I'll try to provide it for you, oh, there we go. It is working. Okay, so here is Alan Cross, "Streaming is Killing Music."
I'm going to assume that there are some music fans in the audience, right? Okay. So I have a bit of a rant that we're going to go on here, and it should be of interest to anybody who listens to music. And this rant really began when I was in grade 7. This was in Mr. Penner's science class. I couldn't find a picture, but let's just say that this is a reasonable facsimile. And Mr. Penner said something that really stuck with me for a reason I don't know. He said, he was trying to tell us about the 3 states of matter. And he says, a solid is obvious. You know what the shape of a solid is. But a liquid or a gas, they assume the shape of the container in which they're stored. I have no idea why that stuck with me, but it kind of blew my mind in a weird way. And then when I was getting deeper into what's going on with music today, I thought of Mr. Penner again. And I thought, you know what? We can apply those same principles with the 3 states of matter to music. We can talk about containers. Now, this is the first container that we ever stored music in. Up until Thomas Edison came along with his wax cylinder, music was effervescent. It was there and then it wasn't. There was no way to store music for later analysis, later enjoyment, later study. But with this, we began to see music preserved for future generations. Now, before then, a song could be a couple of rhymes that you spouted off in the pub. It could be a folk ballad, which went on for as many verses as it took to tell the story. It could be a symphony, which could go on for an hour or more. The Greek national anthem has 158 verses. Wow. So the music was flexible. It was like a gas in the air. There was no container for it. But with the Edison cylinder, it had a container. And that container could hold 2 minutes worth of music. If you wanted to be a recording artist after 1877, your music had to conform to the size and shape of the container, which meant a 2-minute song. Okay, so for the first time, there is a time limit on music. Then, around 1900, a guy by the name of Emil Berliner came up with the idea of taking some of Edison's principles and applying them to a rotating flat disk. And after a couple of years, everything standardized into a 10-inch disc that ran at 78 RPM with grooves cut so far apart. The math and the geometry tells us that if we use those standards, we can get between 3 and 4 minutes of music before we have an interruption, before we have to get up, change the record, or turn it over. 3 or 4 minutes. That's the size of our container. And for the next 50 years, the 78 RPM record became the thing that standardized our appetite for popular music. We began to expect songs that were 3 or 4 minutes. Now, this is John Philip Sousa. You might remember him as the guy who does all the marching music. And he absolutely hated the idea of recorded music. In fact, he, in 1906, published an essay entitled The Menace of Mechanical Music. And he believed that by committing something to a permanent storage format, like a record or a cylinder, would lead to unrest and social decline. And the reason is because once you put something in this container, it would be in that container in that form forevermore. It ruined the opportunity for a reinterpretation of that music. That performance would be frozen in time. And what would musicians do if they recorded something once? Were they not needed again? He was actually the guy who came up with the phrase canned music for very good reason. So there's your Edison cylinder. And here we go with a can. So if you've ever heard the term canned music, you can talk to John Philip Sousa about it. Most other people really embraced recorded music. This was cool. For the first time ever, I could enjoy music on my own terms. There were others that didn't like it, musicians' unions for once, because, well, if we're not going to be playing live and radio stations and other places are going to be playing pre-recorded music, well, what are we going to do? And record labels didn't like it very much because, well, if we played records on the radio, get it for free, why would anybody go out and buy records? So we had this 10-inch, 78 RPM record for about 50 years. And like I said, it created this standard for how long songs should be. But then in 1948, Columbia Records introduced something they called the 33 1/3 long-playing vinyl record. By making the record bigger, by cutting the grooves closer together, and by slowing down how fast the record turned, down from 78 to 33 1/3, they found that they could get 20 to 22 minutes of music on a side of a record before they had to get up and turn it over. So for the first time ever, we had this really long interval where we could just sit back and listen to music. The container got bigger. And this led to an explosion in interest in longer forms of music. For example, a symphony. You could get a movement of a symphony quite comfortably on one side of an LP. If you were into Broadway show tunes, you could get a lot of music from that show on one side of an LP. And it was marvelous. So we expanded the music to fit the available space on the container. Now, in the 1960s, this got even bigger. Starting in about 1965, artists began to realize that they had this huge palette that they could fill. And we ended up with wonderful albums from the Beatles and Pink Floyd and Mike Oldfield and so many others. They wanted to write to the size of the container. Now, we still maintained our liking for 3 and 4 minute songs. That was perpetuated by the 7-inch single, which was introduced by RCA Records in 1949 as a response to the 12-inch album. And radio really embraced this. It was cheap, it was easy to use, it was easy to distribute. So our need, our demands for 3 and 4 minute songs was kept alive by the single. Now, a single like this could hold up to 5 minutes. Well, actually, it could hold longer than that, but audio quality begins to degrade after 5 minutes. So we didn't put more than 5 minutes worth of music on one of these records. Not very often, anyway. We had other containers in the 1960s. We had the cassette, which was invented by a Dutch company called Philips. We had the 8-track, which was invented by, was it somebody wooed the 8-track? Okay. And then we had reel-to-reel tape. Now, you could buy pre-recorded records, pre-recorded music on all 3 formats, but they, nobody really messed too much with that long capacity of the LP. They didn't fill these containers to the brim. But then comes along the compact disc, 1982 and into early 1983. We stopped talking about a rotating disc that had a spiral that was 500 meters long, and we began talking about a plastic disc that contained megabytes of information. The CD was developed by Philips of the Netherlands and Sony of Japan. And this thing, this new design, could hold up to 74 minutes worth of music. Now, why 74 minutes? Well, there's an apocryphal story that says that the president of Sony insisted that the new format hold his favorite symphony uninterrupted, which was Beethoven's Ninth in D minor, Opus 125. It ran, his favorite recording of that performance ran 74 minutes, so he declared CDs have to hold at least 74 minutes. Not true. It's a really good story. But really what it came down to is that Philips wanted the CD to be 10 centimeters in diameter, but Sony wanted it to be 11.5 centimeters in diameter. So they had a compromise and they made it 12 centimeters in diameter. And if you do the math and all the geometry and you figure out exactly how you place the binary code on the CDs using the standards set out by Sony and by Philips, you get 74 minutes worth of music. It's as boring as that. People began to fill this container to the brim. You had so much more music on a CD than you did on an album. Here's the worst offender. This is the Red Hot Chili Peppers' 1991 album, Blood Sugar Sex Magic. Yeah, you can do that, that's fine. This record has 73 minutes and 55 seconds worth of music on it. So 5 seconds short of the ultimate capacity of the CD. Did it need to have that much music on it? Have you heard this record? Not necessarily. But again, we filled the available container. Then we get to the internet. On March the 14th of this year, which is also affectionately known as Pi Day, 3.14, right? A guy in New Mexico posted this. He calls it shepherd's pie. And what he did was take pi, the mathematical concept, and extend it to 1 billion digits. Then he taught an artificial intelligence music program to base music on those 1 billion digits. So shepherd's pie, in its entirety, is 999,999 days long. It's 114 years. There's no container. It can be as big as it wants to be. And this brings me to streaming. Here's where the rant is going to begin. Now, don't get me wrong, I love streaming. I think streaming is wonderfully convenient. The idea of having 50 million songs on a device maybe that big, it is just so cool. The entirety of human musical history on this, wherever you are, awesome. However, there have been some changes in our behavior when it comes to accessing and consuming music as a result of streaming. Let's just talk about physical containers again. When you bought a record, CD or vinyl, doesn't matter, you had to work for a certain amount of time before you earned enough money so you could actually go out and buy one of these things, right? And then you would take it home and you would listen to it over and over and over again, even to the songs you didn't like. Because if you made up your mind that you didn't like a song on an album, well, it was kind of like you wasted your money a little bit, right? So you would listen to these songs over and over again until the penny drops and you go, yes, okay, fine, I like it. That's one thing. The other thing was that the record, the container, had additional resources. There was artwork that you could study. There were liner notes. There were lyric sheets. This was all really cool. So you had this financial investment in the container and what was on it, and you had this intellectual investment in the container based on what you could divine from it. Streaming, not so much. It is context-free music that goes in one ear and out the other. There is nobody to tell you why that song is important, what's cool about this band, who is behind this album, where is this scene building, and what is this sound all about. You don't hear any of that. It's in one ear and out the other. I call it organized noise. And again, don't get me wrong, it's here to stay, love it a lot, but for a rich music experience, it's kind of lacking a little bit. The other thing that we need to talk about are some really frightening numbers. There is a company behind Spotify called the Echo Nest, and the Echo Nest is forever parsing data from users. They know exactly how we listen to music, how often we listen to music, and how we skip music. This is really important. I'm going to give you these numbers. If a song comes on and you're listening on Spotify, there is a 24% chance that you will skip that song in the first 5 seconds. There is a 29% chance that you will skip that song in the first 10 seconds. And there is a 35% chance that you will skip that song before 30 seconds have passed. Now, this is a really important concept. No one gets paid for a stream unless it runs for at least 30 seconds. So, producers and composers and songwriters and record labels are throwing everything they can at that first 30 seconds to make sure we with our short attention spans, hang on to that song for at least 31 seconds. Best example right now, Taylor Swift and Me. Now, when you hear that song again, listen to how it starts. How long is the intro? 0 seconds. When does the chorus come up? Almost right away. How many hooks can you count in that first 30 seconds? A lot. The idea is that this song has been genetically programmed to hold our attention for 30 seconds. That's perverting, changing, altering the way music is being created. Let's go a little bit further. If you look at the Billboard Hot 100, and you go back to 2000, the average length of a hit single was 4 minutes. There were no songs under 2.5 minutes. Today, the average length of a song on the Hot 100 is 3 minutes and 30 seconds, so a decline of 30 seconds. And the number of songs under 2.5 minutes has increased by 8% over just the last 3 years. I'll give you a great example. What's been the number one song for the last 12 weeks? Old Town Road by Lil Nas X. How long is Old Town Road? I'll tell you, 1 minute 57 seconds. The reason these songs are getting shorter is because artists and producers and engineers are looking at the data and they see, oh, okay, a shorter song seems to indicate that people will skip less. There's a greater chance of us getting to that 30 seconds with shorter songs. And with a shorter song, we can have more shorter songs after that on a playlist so that the 30-second mark comes up much more quickly. Now, let's think about this if you're a prog rock band, all right? And you specialize in songs that are 7, 8, 9, 10 minutes long. You are going to get paid exactly the same amount for a 10-minute rock and roll epic than somebody who writes a song that's 2 minutes long. So you might think, as an artist, why bother writing a song that long? I'm not saying you won't do it, but if your album has 5, 10-minute songs on it, you have a chance to score that 30-second mark 5 times. But consider a band like the Pocket Gods. They're from the UK. They understand how things work. Earlier this year, they released an album called 300 by 30. And what that is 298 songs, each less than 45 seconds long. And the idea is, put it on, and that 30-second mark comes up an awful lot. And that's where they make their streaming money. I'll give you another example. There's a band called Wolfpack, very clever. They needed some money, so they released an album that had 10 tracks on it. Each track was 32 seconds long, and each track was dead silent. There was no audio on it whatsoever. So they told their fans, put this on when you go to bed. Put it on repeat. And every time it went past, what happened? They got paid. And they made $20,000 until Spotify called them and said, cut it out. Again, gaming the system. It's all about the container. If the container is nowhere, well, then look what can possibly happen.
Okay, so that's Alan Cross making some really interesting points, in particular about streaming music and the fact that artists only get paid if you listen for 30 seconds, and that up to almost 30% of listeners don't get to that spot. So now when you listen to music in the future, particularly, maybe you can, see how long you think you'd listen to that, see if how maybe track if how often you skip, right? And how long it takes you to skip. So anyway, just a really interesting conversation. Again, any comments on that, feel free to send them my way. But I wanted to, a couple of slides here to go, and then we'll call this a day in part 2, but number of active users for major streaming services, and this is from 2016 projected out to about 2023. And that black line that you see here is actually Spotify. Spotify has become obviously an industry leader. Pandora is diminishing. Amazon Music climbed a little bit, but not as much as obviously Spotify, and Apple Music has a similar, I think, trajectory, but less users than Amazon or Spotify. So As for the business of sound, from the 1950s to the 1980s, a large number of competing labels. By 1998, 6 major labels remained, and by 2012, it's only Universal, Sony, and Warner. So there's a lot of different, folks out there, but they're generally under these 3 major umbrellas. These 3 companies that control 65% of the recording industry, which is pretty significant. And you're seeing that in other areas too. Of media. So clearly, some issues there. Revenue was down beginning in 2000 due to file sharing, but it's been relatively stable since 2010. And the US market accounts for about 1/3 of global sales of music. That is very similar to what you see, I think, in other forms as well. And then you might need to zoom in on this a little bit on your own screen when you look at this on the PowerPoint, but this is US recorded music revenue by format. And I found this very interesting. So the dark blue back in 1973 is LP or vinyl, right? And then if you look at the orange, that is CD. The purple would be downloads, right? Either album or single, right? So the purplish in nature. And then the green is basically streaming. And you can see how these formats, right? How technology has kind of shaped what we've done, right? So if you go back, 50 years or so, you can see that sales of LPs were extremely popular in the early 80s, right about here. You can see it's about half and half. And as we get through the 90s or into the 90s, you can see CDs kind of taking it. And then all the way up to here. And then, I'm sorry, CDs are in the, my bad, I missed one. Light blue is cassettes. So basically you can see cassettes replacing the LP, and cassettes were very popular all the way up through like the mid 90s. And then look at how CDs in the orange replaced even cassettes. And then it was CDs for a long time. Then of course here in about 2005, we start to see downloads. And then of course, streaming starts to pop up, more recently in time. So a real fascinating look at how format changes have affected the bottom line. Okay, so that is it for chapter 4. There will be a quiz on chapter 4, as well as chapter 5. So those are combined, chapter 4 and chapter 5. So make sure that you watch part 1. I'm assuming you've watched all of part 2. If for some reason you skip through some of the videos that I shared with you in this lecture today, I would recommend that you click on the link. I will have them posted on your Canvas shell in your module so that you can find them. And then next time I see you will be for chapter 5 when we start talking about radio. So have a good day.